Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Web3 Talks show. And today we are discussing blockchain technology's use in logistics and in the supply chain space. The three of us are physically located in Memphis right now. And so this is a very popular topic when it comes to the Memphis market because of the logistics hub that we are and the business is based here. And so we wanted to do a show where we talked through blockchain's use in logistics and some things to keep in mind and consider. Um, we have Aaron and Brian on with us today. Guys, let's start very broad with why is logistics one of those industries that when it comes to blockchain is one of the first ones that gets the most interest.
So I think the reason that logistics likes the idea of blockchain so much is because they have so many different types of documentation that are getting passed around between the different parties. And right now, the only solution or not the only solution, the solutions are really like SAP databases. And one company's SAP database doesn't necessarily talk to another's, or you probably don't even want that to happen. But then you have to send paperwork through fax, or a lot of your communication is just through one supervisor to another supervisor through their emails. There's no central source of truth in the logistics space except for like your bill of lading. And even then, if you deliver something and the folks that are receiving are checking what they received and they have a discrepancy with the bill of lading, then obviously the bill of lading is not the truth anymore. So then you have to spend time and man hours and stress trying to come to an agreement, like how much are we really going to charge? Was their freight actually damaged? And oftentimes it comes down to, hey, we just want to keep this other company's business. So we're just going to accept that they said that 20% of the product was damaged on this particular load so that we can continue doing business with them in the future.
Yeah, one thing that really surprised me about the logistics industry is how many, little companies or, big companies, but how many companies are involved in just getting a product from one place to another. There's all kinds of people doing all kinds of different things, and they all are potentially on different systems. Even for a large company, like say a FedEx or something like that, even within the FedEx corporation, there's all these kind of, I guess they're probably technically divisions, but really different companies. You have the FedEx Ground and Freight and Air or whatever they have, and they all operate independently. And so there's just a lot of trade-offs, like Aaron was saying, that need to happen. So because of that, whenever we talk about a lot of parties all trying to communicate and balance books and things like that, I mean, blockchain is very useful for that, because it can act as that repository of information that's immutable, and you create fewer mistakes and things like that.
Yeah, and then you'll have different parties in-house that need to work with this information, like accounting, for example. Your accounting office is going to want to make sure that at the end of the day, all the beans are counted and the left side of the ledger matches the right side of the ledger. And oftentimes, there's some discrepancy on a bill of lading. So now they have to reach out to the client, or they have to reach out to the carrier, or whoever it might be. And so now they're starting to get into doing the work of your customer service rep or your logistics supervisor. Basically, a lot of folks are interested in having this central source of truth so that folks like their accounting firm or their accounting department can just focus on accounting, right? I think everybody's dream, everybody that owns a business, is not to have 16 accountants on staff. Just have one accountant that does all the accounting, and then you're good. Well, right now, with the paperwork that's being passed around and getting everybody to confirm that everything's doing everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, there's no way you can do it right now.
Yeah.
So the decentralized storage, I guess, is beneficial to the number of involved parties. Would be a way to summarize that.
Yeah, and yeah, that's definitely a factor in it. Something that comes up all the time when we're talking to these companies, though, when you talk about, you know, the open sharing of information between interested parties, is something that's really important to consider in blockchain, is that not all blockchains are necessarily open to the public in the sense that, you know, everybody in the entire world can see all the data. In situations like this, you can set up things like permission blockchains, or just kind of consortium blockchains or things like that. There's products like Hyperledger that get used a lot for these situations, where all of the interested parties run nodes and are privy to the information that's on the blockchain, but the outside world is not necessarily. So that's just something I wanted to bring up in case, you know, a lot of times we'll talk to companies and they'll completely discount blockchain because they think it's all 100% completely unencrypted public information, when that's definitely not the case.
Yeah, and you can also, you know, permission access to records on a blockchain. And if right now in the logistics space, you don't have access to records that are being held in somebody else's, you know, SAP or warehouse management system. But certain things like your bill of lading, right now they exist. You know, the original copy is at the point of departure, and then you got 2 copies that go with the driver. One goes to the carrier, the person who moves the product from A to B, and the other copy goes to the receiver. And right now, you know, you got 3 pieces of paperwork floating around, and if you want to get access to that paperwork, you literally have to wait for a driver to deliver it to you, right? It's not like, I think right now the other solution that folks use is they'll email a copy of the bill of lading before the truck arrives. Like the carrier may email it on behalf of the delivery company, or sorry, the vendor that's sending the product. But still, you're looking for a source of truth in emails, you know. And if you ever had to find that one email and you're like, man, what is a term that I can use to search in my email box to find what this may have been? Then you know that problem with finding something in email that really probably shouldn't be getting stored in email, right? So if you have a distributed ledger that can hold that, and that, you know, is, you know, permission just for the folks that need access to it, but everybody that has access to it is a stakeholder in the system itself, you know, all that together, you kind of got a solution that's kind of like a dream solution for a whole bunch of stakeholders in the logistics industry right now.
It's also, I guess, valuable to point out that the entire system is extremely paper driven to a shocking level still today. That a lot of times, you know, what you would think is an email is still being faxed and still on paper.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And there's a lot of, like, I've had to do this in a past life whenever I managed the logistics for high voltage transmission line that I built. Towards the end of project, we had to check and balance our books. Like, everything that we got was what we were supposed to get. We ended up somehow we were short on like 1 pole for completing the line. And we had to go back and go through our records, which they were the bills of lading bound in a book, in a trapper keeper, basically. Go through that to make sure that we had what we needed. And some of those records, like, they literally had coffee stains on them, right? So I couldn't go through. If I went through my database, like, most of my database from whenever we received that stuff was created before I got there, because they kind of hired me on to fix some problems, you know. So the folks that were there before were kind of making problems with the input. So the information that was getting put in the database on our end was faulty. It was inaccurate. If we had the information in our database entered by the folks who loaded that truck, that'd be one less moving part there to cause inaccurate data.
There's also a value too of the time stamping component of when information is captured with storing things in a blockchain. So, as soon as that number changed, it would be identifiable if it was being changed or updated. That you have more visibility there than a lot of times when just one person has the Excel document or one person has the server.
Yeah, and in the trucking industry, if you have to wait to get unloaded longer than oftentimes it's 2 hours. So if you have to wait at a location more than 2 hours, you got to pay that driver waiting, money to wait. So that means you have to pay the carrier a late fee, basically. And the solution right now is with the electronic logs that drivers have in their truck. Most of them are Qualcomm. Whenever they get to a location, it'll record, like they'll say, unloading, they'll put a time on it, and that'll get sent up to the satellite, and that gets sent back to the carrier's database. But as a receiver, you may have a truck there that you're not aware of, and the clock's already ticking on you because they're using a completely separate database there. So if you can integrate into a shared ledger and you can see this, all the information for this one delivery, you can see that, hey, I'm supposed to get this delivery today. Oh, they're actually here. My clock started. I only have, 1 hour and 45 minutes left to unload them. I need to, get on this. Having all that information in a not a central place, one source of truth that, keeps everybody happy. The drivers don't like to get paid waiting pay because it's not as much as they would get if they were driving and putting miles behind them. The folks that are receiving, they don't want to have to pay because, they had a lot of business going on and they couldn't get truck unloaded on time. That's just lost money right there. And then the folks at the very end of the supply chain, you and me as consumers, we eventually get lower costs in the end and everybody's happier. The carrier gets to move more freight. They don't have to wait. The folks that are shipping the stuff, they get paid to make sure everything gets to where it's going on time, and they get to keep their relationships, their business relationships. So in the long run, I think that having that central source of truth that is accessible to all the stakeholders, that in the long run is going to not only improve profit margins for all the stakeholders, but also the value delivered to each and every human that uses these things.
Well, you mentioned the electronic logging devices, and that's been a really big topic this year because the government put in some kind of like regulations, like requiring it, and as you mentioned, it being very paper driven. Like now that there's this electronic device in the vehicle, it's a little more challenging to write down by hand inaccurate numbers than it used to be. So that's a great kind of example of what kind of information could be captured by one person that is of interest to multiple parties involved in the transaction. Is that electronic logging? Because I know that as you mentioned, those drivers, they want to be driving because they get paid more. I believe their waiting time also counts towards their number of hours within 24 hours that they can actually drive too. So there's
within 16 hours.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of like conditional, if this then that kind of stuff based off of those hours and how many are being logged here and there and that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, there are other like let's see, so the physics. So just kind of thinking through, so get some ideas in people's heads. So you have like that logging, that electronic logging device information. So that's how many hours this is the truck itself or the driver specifically, like the detailed information of what hours they're driving, where, when, and all that. That also lends into, well, if they're logging that, now they have a physical location of the cargo itself. The cargo itself could be a pallet, or it could be the entire truck is yours. And I recently heard that a speaker in the logistics space was talking about the fact that he did not have up-to-minute visibility of a cargo container that was worth $10 million. Meanwhile, his teenage kid is watching the exact location of a $10 Domino's pizza, like up to the minute. And he was saying that as a joke, but at the same time, my buddy who shared it with me said there was like a collective just groan in the room of everyone just like, yeah, this is ridiculous. we don't have up to minute tracking. So that, I mean, those are both topics that I hear in the meetup areas around Memphis and other like logistics gatherings that I'm in, is the like giving us visibility of like what's actually happening with our freight, but then also give us visibility of like, if I'm paying, then how long did it take, and like when did it actually arrive, and those sort of numbers. Let's see. Yeah, and the time stamping factor there.
Well, that pizza that's getting delivered, they're not using blockchain to manage that data about where that pizza's at, right? But what they are using is an API, right? So you can build your own application if you want to that can reach out to Domino's central database and query the status of a particular order. I'm not sure if Google does it already, or maybe Uber Eats, but companies like Uber Eats can be in business because there's an API that can handle the communication between, now Taco Bell does delivery. So between Taco Bell's point of sale system and Uber's driver dispatch system, right?
Yeah, so maybe the new kids on the block in that delivery space is DoorDash. If you've gotten Chick-fil-A recently, or not Chick-fil-A, Chipotle, they deliver via DoorDash. The way they're able to do that is with these things we call APIs, where it allows one entity to talk to another entity in a formalized, automatic way. We create what are called API endpoints, so they're always going to be there. You know what the data is going to look like coming to and from, and so they can totally use this other third party to contract out this whole delivery service. They don't have to have their own delivery drivers and things like that. And we come across this a lot in the logistics area. And because, we started this whole conversation saying there's a ton of these companies working together and all sharing information and trying to get, the status of the pizza back to the end user. That's only possible through APIs. So a lot of these companies already have that technology in place. So one thing we've been working on a lot in the past year is how can we kind of wrap all this blockchain stuff up in APIs that the existing technology is already used to interfacing with. So that's something that we as a company at Web3 Devs have spent a lot of time thinking about and a lot of time doing in a few different situations.
Yeah, a lot of those wrappers for APIs that talk to blockchains, we create those and stick them into WordPress plugins. So anybody that already has a WordPress application can just bring it into their administrator console on their website dashboard and set it up, and it'll, you put in your limited amount of information that you need to put into, but everything else is automated. It sets up everything for you. What about, are there logistics companies that are using WordPress right now? Do any of y'all know?
I kind of get the feeling that the use of APIs is more newer in the logistics space, because a lot of these companies are using legacy systems. I'm not talking about the huge, globally recognized, but all the regional and city level couriers, like those are the folks that maybe don't even use email. You know, they're still like getting that fax machine or whatever. That bill of lading, like they want it in paper form. So I think the API stuff is probably that's more the cutting edge probably in the space, where that's not considered cutting edge in other industries.
Right. Now, since we have services like Uber and Lyft and whatnot, there's a lot of talk about how carriers are going to get more and more competition from like Uber trucking, right? I'm not sure if Uber trucking is a thing yet, but that would be an entire industry right there that could profit from being able to tap into that one source of truth, because a single trucker doesn't have, you know, his staff back at the office there taking care of dispatching and handling bills of lading and managing insurance and all that. So they're going to need that additional service team behind them. And if we can automate those sorts of things with, you know, a central source of truth in a permissioned ledger, or even better, if there are financial and economic incentives to distribute that sort of blockchain amongst all the stakeholders and all the users. Well, if we have that, then we have a self-sustaining, free sort of data layer that you can run an entire Uber trucking on.
Yeah, and there's some interesting solutions getting into the space. I know this isn't in the United States, but in Canada, there's an EOS version of Uber. They couldn't do it in the States because of the legality of like picking up strangers and transporting them and all that. But apparently, and you can do it in Canada. So when we were out at EOS Hackathon in San Francisco, was that November? I think November. You know, one of the top 3 teams was solving that last mile problem in other countries where you're kind of what we're talking about. Like if you just have an API that's sending the information to the designated person that needs the information, hey, package is located here, transport to there. There's just some really interesting things you can shield all that, you know, billing information or whatever, all the information that is unnecessary, but it could still be coming from that same source, but filtered based off of what they need to know. And then, I mean, just based on what you were saying, made me think of how quickly, I'm sure the people that worked on it didn't think it was quickly, but as a consumer, how quickly the Amazon Prime delivery rolled out. Like they were announcing, you know, hey, you can, on your local level, you can purchase a truck and begin delivering for Amazon Prime. And then it seemed like, I don't know, next month I saw Amazon Prime branded trucks driving around Memphis. And usually we're one of those cities that's kind of, you know, you see it in larger cities and then it eventually gets to us, but boom, you know, it just popped up everywhere. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so that team that was working at the EOS Hackathon in San Francisco too, I mean, they were talking about not just in the United States, but that last mile delivery can get incredibly expensive using traditional methods. I think they were talking about like in India or something, getting something from the post office to 4 blocks down the street could cost them $50 to get it delivered or something. And with this kind of decentralization or, you know, Uberization of the last mile delivery process, they were able to cut that down significantly to just a couple bucks. And I found it interesting too. We think about that like overseas, but there are places in the United States that's also the case. Some of these more remote places or like Indian reservations and things like that.
But and something to mention, like why that was not to cut you off, Brian, but it's like this thought, like, why was this such an interesting thing? Because when we're talking about last mile and a network of carriers and all that, then in a lot of cases, the decentralized solution isn't necessarily the best. Like you would think, oh, well, you know, if the package is under the care of a specific person, then they don't need to decentralize it. They can have their own centralized information. But this this top 3 winner at that hackathon had incorporated the compensation into their solution. So it wasn't just the, hey, pick this up, drop this off over here, but it was the person that facilitated that transaction to be verified would then get their compensation at that moment, because all the factors checked out, everyone who had to confirm was all being done, recorded, and confirmed in a blockchain, and that released the funds.
Yeah, and in a smart contract, I believe, if I recall correctly. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, you don't have to wait on what are those called, 10 and 30 terms, where you can you get your payment within 10 to 30 days.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So
well, and also
lands,
with the freight industry, there is all kinds of like additional like fuel surcharge and all these other like add-ons and discounts, and it gets really, that bill of lading is already complicated enough with all the information that's on this one piece of paper or whatever, but it's like there's additional things that happen after the shipper physically relinquishes the cargo, and then all that has to be reconciled, and some of it's fought and some of it's accepted and some of it's worked into other things. So there's a lot of opportunity there to eliminate a lot of back and forth and waiting and holding up and confirmation, and that if it could all happen along the way.
Yeah, and if you think about that, eliminating, what's happening when all that waiting and verification is happening, that's probably like a physical person looking over the paperwork in a room somewhere. Whereas if you do this all in smart contracts and on blockchain technology, you could potentially cut out a lot of those middlemen, thereby cutting out a lot of your costs.
Yeah, and I don't know if you all know this, but at truck stops, there's like a dedicated FedEx box for drivers to stop at and drop in all their bill of ladings and special packets to go back to their carrier, right? So those don't get dropped off immediately. Once you've got your next load assignment, you're taking off straight from wherever you unloaded at to go get loaded someplace else. So you're not dropping off your bill of lading. It's not until you refuel, and trucks, they need to refuel about once a day. If they got 2 big tanks on them, they can maybe do once every 2 days. So let's assume you got a truck with 2 big tanks on it, and it's doing a cross-country thing. Maybe 2 days later, then it finally gets in the mail that this delivery was dropped off and signed for. Then that takes 1 to 2 days to get back to your carrier, right? So now it's 4 days later whenever accounting is looking at it, or whoever needs to look at it. And if we were using blockchain with a settlement layer right there at the point of unloading, sign off on a smart contract, yes, we received it in good condition, and it drops, right? You don't have to wait 4 days. You don't have to wait for accounting to look at it. That's, all you need to do is maybe at the end of the week have your director of your accounting department bless off on all the things, right? You don't have to have an auditor. Yeah, an auditor. I think all these carriers and basically everybody in the logistics space. So you're going to have 3 auditors, right? One from the dispatcher or the folks that are sending the product, one from the carrier, one from the receiver. You got an auditor at each place, matching up every bill of lading to every penny that's been spent, right?
And then using the use of smart contracts, then it's very yes or no whether that company or that carrier's discounts are being applied where they're supposed to and where they're not. It's not a whole bunch of double checking. Did they give us the discount on this? Did they give us the discount on that? That can all be built into the smart contract.
Yeah, what a lot of people don't realize is there's entire books this thick put out by our federal government on how to transport and do business in the transportation space. It's called CFR 49, Code of Federal Regulations 49, transportation or something. And so it may be bigger than that, but truck drivers get a book about this big with the chapter that applies to them, right? They get a book this big in legalese on, you know, all the things the federal government requires you to do with your bill lading, if you're moving hazmat, what information needs to be on that hazmat documentation, where in your truck it is stored, what numbers to call if anything goes wrong. So right now, you know, you're wanting a truck driver who's probably sleep deprived, because even with the 16-hour rule or the 14-hour rule, however it works out, they're not getting, you know, a full 10 hours of sleep at night. They're usually not getting a full 8. You know, they may have to unload before they go to sleep, so there's 10 hours out of their minimum 8-hour rest. And so at best they have 6 if they're the kind of person that can go to sleep immediately as soon as their head hits a pillow, right? And so you got important information on this paperwork that's sitting in the door of the truck. You got this important information that's sitting in this dictionary-sized book, and there's no alarms going off saying, you know, hey, driver, one of the things you're doing isn't legal, right? Maybe a good dispatcher is checking on these things, but dispatchers at these logistics companies, they're in charge of like 40 drivers, right? So they're not doing a 3 or 5 minute check-in with every driver each day. They're, you know, you check in with a driver whenever you give them their dispatch, or you call up your driver whenever something's gone wrong and you need to be like, what the hell happened? Like, why is the customer trying to bill us $5,000 for this?
Yeah. So yeah, that actual, you know, trucks on the road is pretty interesting to me, because not only, you know, we talked about these contracts and how to get paid and all that, but that technology could easily be combined with what some companies here in Memphis are already doing, like this company called Presect, which is doing Internet of Things for the trucking industry, where they have I don't know what it's called in the truck, but it'd be like in a car, your ODB2 port or whatever it's called. They're actually collecting all that usage and location information and things like that on the trucks in order to do preventative maintenance. But that could easily be also used to basically be feeding real-time information into these smart contracts and things we've been talking about. So at that point, you know, the driver, all he has to do is drive. Like you said, you just want one account and allow your company to do everything else. At the same time, you know, at that point, the driver, all he would have to do is drive, and he wouldn't have to even do anything else. This all could be completely automated by combining some of these emerging technologies. And I think actually a lot of people are looking at stuff like that, and it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, a lot of people are looking at combining them. The thing is, all the different IT that goes into this whole process, you know, that's 40 years of legacy software and hardware and all these different things. Some of it may be new, like the Qualcomm systems. You know, I think they mandated those, or they did the law change on that, the rule change on that, maybe 6 years ago. So like the highest tech part of the truck, you know, that's 6-year-old technology. And if you implement APIs in a blockchain, those things aren't coming right out of the truck, right? Since there's rules and legislation passed in regards to those electronic logs, whatever solutions that you do come up with, it may have all the things. It may be the best thing that the free market could provide, you know, and make everybody millionaires and billionaires and be amazing. But it's not legal, right? You can't put all those things together yet until somebody blesses off on it. Well, how are they going to know what to bless off on if we don't make it? Well, because we can't make it because it's not legal yet. And I think with that whole process, the way we're going to get there is we're just going to combine two things into, you know, one thing with blockchain. And then you'll see the ancillary benefits. And then once you see those ancillary benefits, then the lobbyists are going to go say, hey, lawmakers or decision makers, can we ask you to not require that we do this particular step anymore because it's covered by what we're getting from the blockchain? And then after a year, they'll make the decision and say, yes, you can do that. And then once they do that, then it'll cascade with the other things that you can do. Like, okay, we're going to build this in without obviating the old system, right? We still want to have both features, and we don't want to break this one because if we break this one, we go to jail. But we want this one to work. So we're going to develop this up until we can make a case to the rule makers that this is no longer necessary.
Well, and that's the beautiful thing about these things, typically using APIs already. That's one of the strengths of using an API, is you kind of have this layer on top of everything that's platform agnostic. It doesn't care what's going on behind the scenes. So you can change these things out piecemeal, one at a time, without having to disrupt the entire industry and do all that stuff. So luckily, that's kind of the way it seems like this industry is set up a lot already. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, it's not going to change overnight, but we can do one system at a time until it gets to where it needs to be.
Yeah. And if we can find ways to help people take advantage of the 90% of tax law, which is how not to pay your taxes, and you can record all those things and not lose them, then you're getting to play the government's game and you're making money at it. Right. So if your accountants aren't having to, do random write-offs at the end of every week, like, we couldn't consolidate this, the information is lost, we got to write this off as a loss. Those sorts of things. I'm not sure what other things go into it, but whenever there's ambiguity, you can't go to your tax attorney and be like, we want to write all this off. And he's like, Sarbanes-Oxley says that's too ambiguous. You can't write it off. You have to pay us taxes for it. Whereas with blockchain as the data layer, it's no longer an issue. It's like, everything was accounted for. This item was reported as packed and it did not arrive, but we know that it's this QR code or this lot number was the one item that was lost and written off on this date. So then your tax attorney is like, oh yeah, this is super simple. Yeah. Easy write-off. You get 20% of your money back at the end of the year, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we've hit on multiple topics here with our subject here that we address with logistics and blockchain technology and supply chain and how those two things are appealing and challenging. Yet again, we've identified another user acquisition hurdle. If you're in the blockchain technology space, it seems like it's one after the other, right? But any other like closing thoughts or anything before we wrap up this topic?
I just can't wait till I get to pay less at Walmart because blockchain made everything a little bit cheaper for me.
and self-driving trucks and all the future things that we were supposed to have already.
Oh yeah. Yeah, imagine if the majority of the trucking industry was owner operators. Everybody, all those owner operators, they make a little bit more money.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, a lot of the things we talked about today, I think, really open it up to where, as Brian said, Uberization. Is that in the dictionary yet? Seems like it probably already is.
It will be
like
next year.
The Uberizing of all the things. But yeah, all right. Well, thank you guys both for joining us today on Web3 Talks. And just a reminder, Web3 Talks is brought to you by Web3 Devs, and you can talk to us at web3devs.com. We do blockchain development and help businesses connect to blockchains, whether they be private or public blockchains. And as mentioned in this conversation, we're doing a lot of API integrations, and we've used them just for different legacy systems to speak to each other, and also we use it a lot to put a front end on interacting with blockchains as well. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you about your upcoming blockchain technology projects.
See ya.
Bye.